I'm Robin Luther, been a member of the wood turning club for a long time. Started wood turning a little bit different than most people. I started wood turning doing hollow spirals. Most people say, well, that's too hard to do for wood turners, and I started doing that first thing. That got me into wood turning because I just simply read an article in a magazine, turn a piece of wood round and use a Forstner bit and drill holes in it and sand for the next 10, 15 hours, and you have a hollow spiral. I thought it was very interesting and ended up joining the club, and $10,000 later, I might start to regret it. I don't know. But it's led me to a lot of other things, the Celtic Knots being one of them. So I guess I can get right into how to make them, because the biggest problem with doing them, if you will, is the fact that how I do them, you're using metal working tolerances with wood. Because if you look on the sheet, I make a shim, I say 20 thousandths, and I shoot for between 20 and 120 and 115 thousandths in thickness. So when you start, the first thing you got to make sure is that you make your blank completely square, all four sides. Because if it's not square, if you will, the length, if you start spinning and look, the tips won't line up. So you want them to be, for me, because I just think everything has got to be perfect. I've made Celtic knots before, but I've always had a shift in the lines. And it took me a long time to find a guy on YouTube that actually did it where you don't have the shift with the lines. After I seen it, it was like, that's not hard. So okay, everybody has kind of seen these jigs. I make jigs at different angles for different products. I started out with these two, which are here. You know, the first set I made, and I thought the Celtic knot looked small. So the next time I did it, you can see my Celtic knot now quite a bit longer. And, you know, fills the piece a little nicer, in my opinion, gets more to the third concept. And with the rolling, with the pepper grinders, I have made some from anywhere from 25 to 35 degree jigs. The 25, it just simply makes the pepper grinder another, you know, inch or so taller. And down below are the ones that I'm using now, which I use for the French rolling pins and the new version of the regular rolling pins. I don't remember if I didn't put the angles, because to me, how big the angle is a little subjective. Everybody has a different idea of what would look the best. You know, I always look at it, I make what's best in my mind, and everybody else should make best what's in their mind. So, and after you go through making a jig, you know, my first attempt at making jigs is forgetting that I'm cutting as deep as my table saw will cut. I didn't make my blocks on the end nearly high enough. I still was able to use them, but you know, when you only got about a half an inch of wood there, stuff moves a bit. So, but with my blanks, I mark all sides, 1 through 4. And that way, you know, I start with number 1 up. run it through the table saw. Oh, yes, here. Run it through the table saw, and then I have my cut. And everybody, even though I say 120 thousandths, that's for the Fosner bit, I mean, for the forest saw blade that I've got, that I'm using now. If I change to a different blade, I got to measure. Make sure. And measuring the saw cut doesn't really work very well. I measure it by sanding pieces of wood until I get one that fits. And, you know, it's got to be the technically the hardest part is just making this wooden shim. Because I run it through my sander and I get it really close. Without adjusting the sander, I keep running it through until I get to where I want to be. Because everything deflects. And then what happens once in a while is I'll get it and I'll get it that far. And it won't go in. Well, you hit it with a hammer, I can tell you exactly what's going to happen. It breaks. So I just take, I'll just take a clamp like this and then just force it in. And that works really good. You know, I always use waterproof glue because anything that's in contact with food you wash, when you wash it, it gets wet. Eventually the glue fails if you don't use waterproof glue. So, but, you know, once I've gotten this far, which is really the majority of the time consumption, because the rest of it now is waiting, because you glue a piece in and you wait for the glue to dry. And I forgot to bring my oscillating saw, so you got to use your imagination. But I use my oscillating saw to cut this. And it doesn't matter. You can, if you look at mine, you can see I cut deep. I cut it off. I'll run my random orbital over it a bit to get rid of any glue to make sure I'm still good and square, not riding on a glue joint, to cut the next one. You know, every time, again, I start with number 1 up, number 2, number 3. That way I don't accidentally cut my shim out. Not that I have ever done that. But trust me, if you don't number it, you will. So, any questions so far? Yeah. Yes. No, that is, yeah, thank you. That is the trick. Now this piece here, if you look on my sheet, I have a minimum diameter, size for the blank. This one here is the minimum, and you can see I got very little wood left. Here's a good example of where I'm a little bit bigger than the minimum, and I got a lot more wood right here. It works better if you make it a little bigger than the minimum, because you're turning it away anyways. Because your finished diameters, if you're at the minimum, your finished diameter is, difficult to actually achieve your finished diameter on the maximum size, but they can really vary in size quite a bit. Because this piece here was a perfect example. When I drilled my hole, it got a little off center on one side, therefore it didn't meet in the middle. So I just simply drilled it out a bunch of times until the shaft that I put in it fits, and it turns now. But I had the problem, I'm off center, so now it will wobble. So I just put it back in on centers in my hole and turned it back round again. So this one is technically smaller than the finished diameter should be. But who's going to know it? You know, it still rolls, it'll still roll dough. Yep. Glue in a, yeah. Yeah, then you cut it off and sand it a bit, and then you take it, you know, back again to the table saw, and this time you put number 2 up. You're using the numbers as just a reference to know that, because part of it is with numbers you don't have to think. Unfortunately, yeah, and if you look, I've got an X here and my numbers here. So I'm always referencing the same end, because no matter how hard you try to make your jig, your Celtic knot's not going to be completely centered. It's going to be off some. Same jig. Yeah, you're just turning it each time. And by following the numbers, you're always going to cut a different side. You know, and I have done it when I started. The next time I cut it, I put it this way. Well, it works. You still get the Celtic knot. It just doesn't look quite right. I usually wait about a half hour, 45 minutes at least. A lot of it is, you know, I know I can see my glue isn't completely dry, but it sands a lot better with wet glue. You just go through a lot more sandpaper. Well, you cut it and then it looks like this when you're done. There's no glue. No, because technically, you know, the only thing you're cutting now the next time you cut, when you cut to the next cut, there's only a little area in there where you're cutting through the glue and the wood. It doesn't affect the table saw at all, because that glue it's just like kind of like cutting wet wood. And there's so very little of it because it's, you know, I've never had an issue at all with that. And not yet. It never has. I have a saw stop. I have triggered it more than once. So luckily I can say only twice with my fingers. So, oh yeah. Well, the thing of it is with the saw stop, what's interesting is, okay, here I put number 2. Okay, when you look, now you've got to hold your piece of wood. I'm holding it here. I saw. I'm not in contact with any glue or anything other than the wood. You know, when I get to here, then I go to number 3 again. Well, I'm not going to put my thumb here on the joint, you know, or fingers. I'll be here off of them. And I think it's more psychological than anything of not grabbing, you know, your sawed spot, you know, grabbing where it's nice and smooth. I mean, I guess you could build a jig where you can clamp it in place. I don't know where the advantage would be, because I haven't yet had an issue running it through the table saw. You know, that my piece of wood moves on me or anything, because it's held 2 sides and I'm holding it the 3rd and 4th, both down and against, because I run it both through and back. And I kind of found that, if you will, works better by running it through and back, because if I just run it through, then I have, a lot of times I might have to clamp my shim to get it to go all the way in. Like I said, the biggest issue with this is strictly the tolerance between the shim and the saw cut. Because if you make your shims too big, you'll never get them in. If you make it too loose, you're going to see glue lines. And both outcomes don't give you the end result that you really want. So, yeah. Yep. Oh, no, if you look like this one, I got 4 13/16 for the saw. That's where I set my fence. And that gives me where I should saw right through my saw cut again. And if I would have, this is probably the one that's the worst. You can see how it's wider. Because when I set it up and cut it, my Celtic knot was here instead of here. So I just adjust my fence to get it kind of as centered as I can in my piece of wood. Because again, if you were to measure from end to end on any of these, they'll all be the same on both sides. But if you would take this, which was my original blank, and if you look, these two pieces that I'm cutting off are a little different. That way my Celtic knot is centered in my finished piece. So, all good? Need any more questions? Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's when you look at 35 versus 15, you can see the big difference in how the angle's looking. And I've kind of noticed from 30 to 35, it doesn't change it a ton. But if you were to go from 15 to 10, your piece of wood might not be long enough. It closer you get to straight, the longer the Celtic knot ends up being. So, because if you look, the different lengths in these two Celtic knots is, 25 degrees, and I think, what is the one down here? 20 degrees. Okay, so this one, yeah, this is 15. So the difference between 25 and 15 is a lot. But the difference between 25 and 30 is not a whole lot. So that 5 degrees starts getting to be a lot. Because I noticed that when I made the pepper grinders. My first one I made this length because I had a rolling pin that didn't quite work out. I had end checking and I just kept cutting until it was gone and I was right by my Celtic knot. So I just cut it off and made a pepper grinder out of it. Yeah, my original start, I was using a bunch of dysfunctional wood that I thought might work for making rolling pins. And I started out with over 20 pieces and ended up with 9 rolling pins, and 3 of them were the French rolling pins that were 4 inches shorter than they're supposed to be. So my next batch, which is actually what I'm doing here, I started out with what I have. Every piece was, nice wood. I always say, I'm just a typical male. I learned by not doing it correctly. Every mistake is only a learning experience. not really a mistake. So, okay. But yeah, you know, once after I cut these and got my shims and everything, so all the more difficult part is done, I glue them in, whether I can just slide it in like this or I got to clamp it to get in. I actually clamp every piece. I use 3 clamps on every one of them, just because you're clamping something that technically can't be clamped on the other end. So you need to try to get it as tight as you can to, again, keep that glue joint hopefully looking non-existent. And, you know, once you're done, it's just now repeat. Cut it off, sand it, turn it, cut it, glue it, turn it, cut it, glue it, sand it. And you eventually end up, you know, this is, you can actually see all the glue. So you end up with pieces like these, which look nothing like what you're trying to achieve. But, so the French rolling pins, much easier to make, you know, because you just put them in and you have different versions. If anybody has the handout, that's just where I got these different versions of the rolling pins. I made the 2 that I like. I don't personally understand this, because I think of a rolling pin being something you put on dough and roll it and make it flat. How can you make it flat when it's concave? Huh? Yeah, okay. See, I've never used one and have no idea, you know, because it just logically don't make sense to me, but yet I talk to people that bake and they say, oh no, I like that. And it's like, okay, don't ask me. My baking isn't with rolling pins. But I mean, these tend to be the easiest just because you don't have to drill a hole, you don't have to make handles, you know. But in both cases, you turn them around. Turning them around, I to this day, I remember Pete Holtis, who brought a rolling pin in one time and made a comment about how hard it was to make something the same size here, and straight through all the same size. Okay, I can't turn like Pete Holtis, I'll guarantee you that. So when I'm done turning them, they don't look very straight. Okay, I, on the other hand, really believe this is just another turning tool. And if you look, 36 grit. Trust me, your sawdust comes off like wood chips. But then, you know, I make sure my sizes are really as close as I can get them from end to end. And then I sand first with 36 grit, you know, just sanding them, getting them flat and round. You know, then I got 36, 80, and 150. And then I actually go to just sandpaper if I want to go more. You know, and I don't, because these are very thick, heavy paperback sandpaper, 150 grit isn't good enough. You know, because I actually start with like 120 to get rid of the 150 grit scratch lines. These are all from my drum sander, you know. So you get them sanded round. Now with the French rolling pin, all I got to do after I get it cut and turned is cut it to length. And the only thing I'm really looking at doing is getting rid of my drive marks, so I can keep them pretty close to the length of what I started with. because once I cut them off, I just sand my little rounds on the ends off the lathe, you know. And then a French rolling pin is technically done. The regular rolling pin, you get into the next numbers of steps because I mark it where it's 12 inches long because I start with a piece that's like 13 inches or longer. And everything I found is a regular rolling pin is anywhere from 10 to 12 inches. So I mark it, I put dovetails on both ends so I can clamp it in my dovetail clamp. And then I drill it. First, I'll drill it with a short drill bit because I've kind of found with the really long one, it can just wobble on me. So I first go in from the tailstock with a short bit to give me a good starting point for the longer bit. And the longer bit doesn't make it. That's why I put a dovetail on both ends so I can flip it and then it'll go all the way through. Yeah. Starting it with the small one helps to keep it straight and consistent. And if you don't, which was this one, if you look, it's a little smaller in diameter. So technically this is smaller in diameter than what everything I've been told the diameter should be. You know, but to me it's still a perfectly good bowling pin. But and then and this one here was where my ends, when I started drilling, I used the long drill bit and it wobbled and it was off center. And then because of it being off center, the holes didn't line up. So I do have another drill bit at home that's same size, but it's made for lamp parts. And that one's long enough to go all the way through. So I just kept running that one back and forth until I could get my aluminum shaft to go through it. And that way it still turns. I put it back on the lathe and turned it around again, so it's just a little smaller. But it's, you know, salvaged from a mistake. You know, and like I said, that's why I started doing after that, using a small drill bit to stay on center and get a hole started, because the 12-inch long brad point bit has way too much flex in it. Yeah. No, I don't. When I put it in a chuck, I use the center to hold it centered. Okay. And then I drill it. And then I just flip it around and do the same thing. One of the things, if you have to put it back on the lathe, it's got a hole in it. Right here, right now. Okay. You put the dovetails on, mark your length, and then you take and put it into your dovetail jaws and drill your hole. And with luck, you're done. Okay. As long as you don't have any issues with drilling the hole and stuff. You know, because part of it is you don't necessarily want to drill all the way through anyways. Because if you are drilling a little crooked and you get to the other end and come out, you might be so crooked you can't even salvage it. Nobody's going to see you being off center in the middle of the piece. You know, if you're off center, then your only problem is making your hole good enough for your shaft to go through. But I found after I started using the short bit to start, my problems with it getting off center went away. Because when I had to put this one back in, how do you drive this now when you got a hole? You have no, I didn't, I actually cut it all off and thought everything was good, you know, and it's like, okay, not good. Now, how do I salvage it? I actually made myself just a paper drive joint that fits in the hole out of wood. It works, just got to take real light cuts. Keep pressure on it so it burns nice. So, but, and I know, and not to back step a little bit, but I just realized I didn't. Okay, when I'm gluing these shims in, this is a coffee stir stick. I put glue in there and I use the coffee stir stick to rub the glue around. Because again, the first time I did it, I dropped one and it broke. And it was like, but there's no glue in here. And it was like, I thought, okay, put glue on here and slide them together and you'll have glue everywhere. Well, I didn't. So in the cut and on the piece, both. You know, because again, when you slide it in, you're pushing the glue out because there is no real play in it, you know, by design. And also, when you have a different length piece, because if you look at like this one and this one are two different lengths. Well, if you put this one in here and I'm in the right spot, okay. But if my piece is this much shorter, do I got to make another jig? Well, what I did is I just made a little shim block and put it in. So if I'm using a 19-inch piece instead of a 20-inch piece, I make a 1/2-inch shim. And I've, you know, when I actually made this batch for the club, I had 4 or 5 of these because none of my pieces were really all the same length. Yeah, yeah, your goal when you're making your cuts and stuff that you measure from here to the end and here to the end, and they should be the same. Okay, but it's difficult to say the least, you know, because it isn't like, oh, I'm off 1/8 of an inch, I move my fence 1/8 of an inch. No, you know, you're talking moving at 10, 15 thousandths maybe. You know, so it's very difficult. And that's one of the reasons like these. I go 13 inches, gives me plenty of room to clamp it in the jaws, get rid of any tool marks and points. And I can just cut it. So I measure from here to here when I cut my lines for the length. And it's easier to say, okay, I'll cut it here and I'll cut it here. And I'm 11 and 7/8. And it's like, well, that's close enough to 12 for me. It's in between 12 and 10. So it makes it pretty easy. And it's even the same with the French rolling pins. I'll measure it. And I might cut a 1/2 inch off one end and a 1/4 inch off the other. You know, and it just, you know, being a wood turner, I guess being a wood turner and being anal are kind of a pseudonym, that you want everything to be as perfect as you can make them. So that's the reason this is my second set. Okay, yeah, making the jigs. Okay, for one thing, if you look, I've only got 1/2 inch plywood because when I get to these, I've run out of capacity for my table saw. You know, so I can't raise my blade up anymore. So I can only cut so deep. If I'd be using 3/4 inch material, I don't know that I could even make a regular rolling pin and have it the correct diameter. So, I mean, I just went to Lowe's and I'd seen they had 1/2 inch paint grade plywood. It's inexpensive. And my first one was very much a guess. No other way to put it. And then I kept, my saw cut was maybe 1/2 inch wide by the time I got it in the correct spot. Now that I've done them and have jigs and I've got, you know, how I set my fence up and stuff, and I double check it, just making sure that I set my fence up and I'm not rubbing the blade. You know, I just got to hit my saw cut. And every time I've made a jig, I've never made them the same because I'm just using what wood I have. But once you have a piece, you know, and you've got, whether it's like this or like this, you know, you can say, okay, here's where my saw cuts are. I put it in here and say, okay, you know, I need to cut right here. And I just measure from my edge to my, because I even do that with like this. I will take, and I didn't bring a square or anything, but I'll just draw a line on here where the saw cut should be. And I'll set it in the jig and then measure from here to the end of the jig. And it's like, okay, that's where I start. And I've gotten, you can see, I'm, you know, this is the one I was off the most, and I'm just basically a saw cut off. So, and if anybody wants help to make a jig or something, you know, I mean, my name and stuff is in the roster. Everything is accurate as far as phone number and address and email. Yeah, I mean, yeah, because I don't know if these, I don't know if they're in the center. See, like that one, it really isn't in the center of my jig. More than anything, I was just using what plywood pieces I had. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could, you know, and I mean, I just followed what other people were doing when I started. And again, I actually, from what other people, I made mine what I had found online. And then I just decided I didn't like, I thought the knot should be bigger in the, for me. I thought, you know, like I said, I thought when you look at my two rolling pins here, you can see the one knot is quite a bit bigger than the other. I prefer, huh? Uh, one is 20, one is 25, and one is, uh, what is this one? This one's 30. So this one is 25 degrees, this one's 30. Okay, and you can see, you know, I just personally feel, you know, for one thing too, this isn't, you can see this is closer to the short limit of a rolling pin versus this one, which is on the long side. Because anywhere from 10 to 12 inches. One's 12, one's 10 and a half. And I just, when I look at it this way, I like my Celtic knot to be like at least a third, maybe a little more. Just that's what I find appealing. No, 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 no. Like you're saying, you want to have this rolling pin with this size of a Celtic knot in it. Okay, or even that. Okay, then it's just a matter of, okay, here's my jig for making the pepper grinders, 35 degrees. All you need to do, granted, you would need a much wider piece of board than this one. Yeah, uh, something like this one. Okay, but now you need to go at a 35-degree angle, which might be something like this. So this board might even still not be wide enough, but it's way too long. So you can do, and a lot of it would be, again, you take your piece of plywood and you decide what angle do you want. Because how I started with making these, I took the piece of plywood and you won't see it because it's pretty much covered up, is I just took a angle gauge and I got one of these, it's actually quite large, and I set the angle I wanted and drew a line on my board. So I knew where to put this, and I know this should be, if you look at my third generation of these, my stop block is real close. My stop block is very close to the end of the piece of, because then by the time I get to my third generation, I'm trying to make my jigs as small as I can because they take up less space when I'm not using them. So, but yeah, you can make, the angle, because I've got, what, 4 or 5 different angles that I've made them. And for me, it was just, what do I like? Like I said, and the next person might be saying, well, I make pens. Why can I not do this with pen blanks? You can. There's no reason you can't. Just rather than having a 3/4 inch piece of wood for your pen blank, you might want to start at 1 inch or 1 1/4 inches. Make your Celtic knot in it and, just turn the extra wood away. First generation, yeah. No, I've never had an issue of it wanting to walk away from the fence. For one, I'm using basically a brand new saw blade, a forest, high quality blade, because you got to have a really good clean cut. And I even find that I push it through and pull it back. And I don't, if I'm using my cheap blade from Home Depot that I have in my saw 90% of the time, I would have sawdust line, but not with a good blade. So I don't know. Yeah, woodworker too. I was thinking 40 or 50, something like that. So, and then it's a combination blade. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know because I came from home improvement stuff and working for a living where time is a factor always. I've always used combination blades because I won't change it just because I'm doing a cross cut versus a rip. You need to get the work done. And even with anything I've done woodworking wise, I've only noticed the real big difference between a high quality blade and your really cheap ones. So, well, yeah, because technically Yeah. Oh, every this the end of my shim. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. Well, and that is one of the reasons I'm a little. I would consider it a little bit paranoid because of dropping a piece and having it break. That I want to make sure I get glue on there. This is all end grain. All my glue joints are end grain. You know, yeah, I'm not. I'm my shim's not end grain, but everything in the my blank is an end grain. Yes, I make them. I oh yes, a whole bunch. Yes, actually, at home I got probably 20 or 30 of them left over because I don't make, oh, I'm making 6 Celtic knots. I'm going to make two of them out of maple, two of them out of walnut, and two of them out of cherry. Well, I don't make 8 pieces. I'll make 12 or 15 for each one because any issue with the wood and it gets filed in the circular file. You know, because what is this good for other than what I'm using it for? And if I can't use it for my shim, you know, and I don't want to say that I got 2 or 3 stacks of pieces of wood like this, different thickness, just on my workbench, but I do because I'm always using shims for different reasons. It's going to be a smidgen smaller than your saw cut. Yes, yes. You know, because technically, when you know, if you're using a high quality blade, they're saying your kerf is 1/8 of an inch. Okay, I've got on my sheet, you know, I make my shims 120 thousandths. That's the thickest, and I go to 115 thousandths. So I'm trying to hold a 5 thousandths tolerance on an industry that 10 thousandths is considered impossible. You know, but like I say, once I'm running it through the sander, and I get to about 130 thousandths, I start running it through it 2 or 3 times. If I can't get it under 125, I will make a very small adjustment and run it through 2 or 3 times because every machine deflects, you know. You anything I got, I've kind of gotten to where I cut them close to the size I want and run them through as short pieces. Yeah, yeah, because the sander doesn't. I've never found an issue with short pieces. I don't know. Yes. Yeah, I know. You find friends that have them. That would be one of the things. I mean, you could try doing it with planes, with even hand sanders, but I don't know how you would ever get the consistency you really need. You know, that was kind of this concept. Okay, what happens if you want to do a Celtic knot in a hollow form? 5 inch in diameter hollow form. I can't cut it on the bandsaw because if I cut it, I cut into 2 pieces, and now I got the problem of trying to hold the piece of wood perfectly straight 4 times. And I've done it. It doesn't work very well because I don't have quite the skill to do that apparently. But I have a friend. I don't even remember the name of the saw he has. But when I asked him if he could make a 5-inch cut for me through a piece of wood that's 5 inches thick, he goes, "Oh yeah, I have a saw for that." And it's like, okay, you know. So it's like, okay, what do I got to do to get a favor from him to do that? Because it's not like this is something you can do in 5 minutes where you can make all 4 cuts and glue it together. You got to make a cut, glue it, wait for it to dry, and do your next cut. So you're there for 4 or 5 hours. So, hmm. Yeah, yeah. I, I would think you could. The only thing with the miter saw is you would want to clamp your piece of wood because even with a new blade going at an angle, your piece of wood wants to move on you. Because I know that's always been an issue as far as doing crown molding. You know, it just wants to move. So, yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I've kind of found with my sander, the 5 thousandths is about as close as I can get. And the last time I made shims for this project, every species of wood is a little different. So I would first do my maple, then my cherry, then my walnut, and do them in batches of species. And I'd measure one piece, it'd be 115 thousandths. I measure the next one, it's 122. Then I'd run that one through again, and oh, it's 120. Okay, I'll run it through again, and 119. Okay, I'm good. It's kind of tedious because you should measure every one of them. I don't, but then I do have to use clamps to push them in once in a while. And then what's interesting is if you got to use a clamp to push it in, you push it in, and right now, if you look, you can't see a crack on either side of that piece of wood. If I got to push it in, you will see a crack on each side of that wood. So that's when you're clamping it together. And then it's kind of I always think of is, the question is, will it turn out now? And it always has. But I never have to go super hard with a clamp to get it in. You know, yeah, but again, when you make them, your pieces are longer. You know, and I mean, the first time I made them, I'd have pieces that would be, 4 or 5 inches out each end, and it was like, well, just kind of a pain. So I refined it to get it to more that it sticks out 1/2 inch on each end. So, but still, but yeah, once you get here and you get your hole through, and I put it back on the lathe, and again, I got my little wooden drive. If anybody knows of something better than that, please let me know. I even thought about, finding a metal worker that would turn me a number 2 Morris taper with a taper tipped end. And it is okay. It's 5/64. I never thought of that, but I should even see if it would work because it's not that much bigger. Yeah, yeah, that's yeah. I bet, I bet, I bet Harbor Freight would carry that. Okay, okay, okay. But you know, once you're at this point, you got your holes and everything through, then you just put it back on and cut it off. And again, when I get it off, I will sand my ends off and rounds. And then you have your rolling pin itself. And when I finish it, either with mineral oil or tung oil or whatever your favorite oil is, I always make sure I fill my hole with oil because even though wood, after you've used it for a while, get nicely burnished and always real smooth, with the oil in it, it rolls smooth right away. Okay, my aluminum, I started out looking for stainless steel, figuring it wouldn't rust. And I read an article, again, where you drill a little hole here and put a bearing in and put your stainless steel shaft through, which means, well, you could drill a bigger hole, and then if you're mismatching, it doesn't matter. I could not find bearings, quarter-inch bearing, but a quarter-inch shaft doesn't really fit through it. And then my thought was, well, if I sand the stainless steel down, what good is stainless steel? Then I thought, well, I'll get aluminum. For one, it's easier to sand, and fooling with the bearing, I didn't like it, and it was like it's turning. Why do I need a bearing? So I went away from that right away. I never even got one complete with the bearing. So, well, the whole thing of it is the aluminum is through the shaft, so it can't bend. Okay, when you put the handle on, again, where can it bend? The only place it can bend is right where the two pieces meet. And, you can't, I mean, it barely moves. I mean, barely. My first shot at doing these was how you figure out your mistakes and how you're not doing it right. Because I filled my hole with epoxy, put it in, and the epoxy runs all over. And it's like, okay, well, I just epoxied my handle to the piece, so I'm pull it all apart, clean all the epoxy off of it. Now I realize, okay, pour my epoxy in, and again, stir sticks work real good to get in that hole, and coffee stir sticks, get the epoxy on all the wood, and then I set it upside down and let the epoxy run out. So that way, when I actually get there and I epoxy my two handles on, I can, if I want, go tight, which, it works. But if, and originally what I did was I bought aluminum shafts, 36 inches long, and cut them in half. After I did that, I was thinking, are they going to be long enough? Well, this one here, you look, it's about an inch shorter. Because when I put these on before, I couldn't really get them tight to the rolling pin. And this one now you can see they're tight to the rolling pin. So when I glue them up in, all I do is barely keep them barely from being tight. Oh, nothing thin enough, put it that way. But, once I've done that where I just let the epoxy run out, now the epoxy is really just into the wood. And when I put it in, it's never been an issue. Even the first time I did it, I realized that was definitely doing it wrong. And I cleaned everything up and had everything. And the only one that epoxied together was that very first one, because I didn't get all the epoxy off of everything. And I actually, I don't remember what I used. Might have been just a blade, a metal cutting blade for a hacksaw, and just went in there with that and went down there and cut it and got it free. Did I do that, or I might have just broke it free by hand and ran sandpaper in it too, because I know I ran sandpaper in it to get it free spinning. So yeah. I mean, like I say though, after I did it the last time where I put the epoxy in, and then I don't set it on a table like that. I set it, like this in between two pieces of wood, and just let the glue run out, the epoxy run out any extra. And then when I put it together, there's really no epoxy, no volume of extra epoxy to come push out at the end, because my shaft, if I push it all the way to one end, you can see it only goes that far, and my hole is like that deep. Because the 18-inch aluminum shaft, the way I'm doing them, is actually kind of the right size. But I want to give it a 1/2 inch space for glue on each side so it doesn't squeeze out. I use Weston. It's Weston. You buy it in bulk. I buy a gallon. It has a gallon and a little more than a quart. The reason I do that rather than using like 5 or 10 minute stuff, buy a little syringe for $10. I'll go buy a gallon and a quart, or a gallon and a little more than a quart for $400. And the thing will last me for years. Because I do one pump, more than enough to do all my handles and everything for each time. And I have no idea how many times you can pump on that gallon can before it's empty, but it's a lot. So, and when I'm making my handles, I did actually here was a perfect example of turning something backwards. Because after I turned it, it's like, how do I drill my hole in it now? It's like, okay, next time, put it in your lathe and turn it this way. So you can leave your wood here and drill your hole through it. Instead, I did it this way. I don't know how to drill a hole through my headstock, and I would be happy with it. So. I probably could, but I thought when I did it, it's a good piece to show at a demo. So people really understand when I say I'm not a real good wood turner, but I don't care about the wood. You've been at my place. I don't care about the wood. I just throw it away and I'll use a different piece. You know, why should I think? And here's another thing that I do. Okay, when I'm drilling my hole, I set my drill bit out of my chuck, the length I want to drill in the hole. Okay. And if you look at this, I run my chuck right up against it and cut a little chamfer there. So even if a little epoxy does squeeze out, it has a place to go before it actually hits the rolling pin. No, on the handle I drill a 15/64 inch drill. A little bit smaller, something that actually, yeah, 17/64. Yeah, and I mean, if you want to come up and feel it, it's a little bit of a friction fit. So I really don't need much epoxy in there. I just need, if I got the wood soaked in epoxy, it can all go away and I'm fine. Because it's, and I don't know if I want a 64 smaller, if I could actually push them together without using a clamp to push them in. So, and one thing I didn't mention is I always use waterproof glue. I learned that from my eldest stepson's girlfriend, because when the war started in Ukraine, they lived in Lviv, which is on the western side of the country, and they had not 12 or 15 people living with them in their one-bedroom apartment. And Deanna calls me and real sheepishly says, "Robin, the cutting board you gave us is falling apart because the girls are being helpful. I don't want to blame them, but they're washing the cutting board and kind of leaving it in the water, and it's coming apart." My comment to her was real quick and simple. "Deanna, the only way you'll get me mad if you don't use it. So I'll send you some more on the next care package." And it was like, okay, use waterproof glue. It won't happen again. And I mean, I made a lot of cutting boards without using waterproof glue. It was the first time I had somebody tell me it was falling apart. So now if I do anything that gets in contact with water, I'm going to use waterproof glue. So, any other questions? Nope. Well, not really. Being a typical woodworker, I'm kind of cheap. So I wash my glue bottles out over and over and over again until they get to be like, it's not really good. So I bought on Amazon a dozen glue bottles, and in the box came a dozen extra tops. And it was like, okay, a dozen glue bottles will probably last me the rest of my life. But then it's like I buy a brand new bottle of, Type On 3, and I hate those tops. So it was like, okay, I took the top off and said, well, will these fit? And I screwed it on and it fit perfectly. And I said, okay, I'm happy now, because now I can buy 12 of these bottles. Because I'm too cheap to keep buying new bottles. I buy glue in gallons. The Type On 3 is a little harder for me to buy a gallon because I don't go through it as much. Regular Type On, it lasts me, maybe a gallon will last me 6 months. So I need to, I need bottles. But I just keep washing them out because I'm too cheap to keep buying new bottles. So, and actually when they're brand new, the first 2, 3, 4 times, it's pretty easy to wash out. But eventually you start getting glue that doesn't wash out. So, but then I decided to, at the cost of 12 glue bottles on Amazon, I can afford to buy 12 more. So just can't buy a new lathe. That's all. Yes, yes. Yeah, you don't need the bearings as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I don't see a reason for them. I mean, if you want to try that, I'll give you some. I have 4 stainless steel shafts and bearings, but it's more work than I thought it was worth. So, because I put the shafts in the freezer and tried putting the bearings on and it didn't work. And I don't have a press. And then again, I don't know how you would press them on that easily. Yeah, because yes, because in the one article that I had, if you want to email me if you didn't get a copy of it, I can send you a copy. Has where you drill out the handle completely and you make a pin that you put into the rolling pin of wood, and then you just put them together, and that works. And that makes sense to me, but I also look at, as Pat said, will this bend? Well, think of something this small out of wood. Will it break? Because it'll break a lot easier than this will bend. You know, my thought is with wood, if you drop it, how big do you got to make your hole to have something that can withstand dropping it? And I haven't dropped another one, mostly in fear that it's going to break. Because again, you're gluing end grain. It really isn't, not your best glue joint. I thought about using epoxy, but then it's like you make your cut and glue, and with the epoxy I got to go wait till the next day. You got 4 days of waiting. Yeah, the holes are bigger than a quarter of an inch. Yeah. And I mean, you could, go bigger shafts too. Just drill bigger holes and bigger shafts. But I don't, because of I can't imagine the pressure it would take to bend these. And if you can bend it, you're probably going to break it. So it doesn't matter if it's bent or not, it's broken. You know. So, any other questions? Because I'm running out of things, and it took me longer than I thought even. The other place. Penn State, are they cheaper than Woodcraft? Because the last time I looked, I bought them at Woodcraft when they were on sale. I don't remember. I think like $14 at Penn State. Okay, because I need more. Because, like you said, they sell. You know, on volume. Yeah, yeah. I haven't found anything other than those. I mean, no other manufacturer that I can know of. Okay, well, that's where it comes into buying more. Yeah, they're very small volume of pepper in them. Yeah. Amazon. You know, I've kind of gotten to be this point that why should I run to 3 different stores to find something when I can sit there watching TV on Amazon and find it and have it delivered to my door the next day. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because like I'm not kidding. I got 4 stainless steel 1/4 inch shafts. I went to probably 4 or 5 Ace Hardwares to get 4 of them, and it was like, and then I thought I got to do something different, you know. And when I tried using them and it didn't work for me, it was like, okay, let's just do aluminum. And, you know, been very happy with the aluminum. You know, the assembly, like I said, other than my first mishap, you know, I haven't had an issue. You know, you know, yeah, $65. And granted, I'm honest. Where I'm trying to sell them is not the right venue, but I don't I don't want to go to the right venues. The only reason I'm going to Ukrainian fundraisers, and I'm starting to find out I don't sell much anymore because it's the same. Quite often, 75-80% of the people are the same people that have been at the last 5 I've been at. So, but it's my wife doesn't understand. I'd rather just make them and give them away than they're out of the house. I had my fun. I made it. I don't care. Yeah. I mean, I can quite often tell you where the wood came from. I started with a tree. So let's see. Cherry. That comes from Wisconsin, in Colgate, Wisconsin, on the farm my brother has there. I cut a tree down and cut it up into lumber. I harvested urban timber for over 12 years. The walnut, the apple, the maple are all local. The honey locust, so is uh, the mulberry, all locally harvested. Yeah, the elm here, again, locally harvested. Actually, even my walnut, I don't know if anybody remembers a number of years ago, probably 8 or 10 years ago, when we went to Colorado Springs to an arborist that had a bunch of walnut. And I know there was only 6 or 8 of us that went down there. Huh? I don't. What? Yeah, this was in Colorado Springs. Okay. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, I know he biggest arborist down there. Yeah, uh, everybody was looking at, well, can I buy this for 20? Can I buy this for 20? And everybody was kind of done. Because his name was Steve, I think, Steve or Scott, the owner of the company. And I asked him, how much do you want for the log? And I forgot what he said, like $200 a log. So I picked 9 of them for another couple $100. He would deliver them to my house. And I picked 1 log. It didn't turn out very good for lumber. The other 8, every board out of every one of them was select or better. No knots, nothing. And the one that I picked out for a different reason, the burl didn't turn out as nice as I was hoping, but it turned out pretty nice. So, but I mean, I got some really nice other wood out of that log, but for turning and stuff, but not lumber. But yeah, and I was real happy. Hindsight, I was real happy I did it because I was only able to get 3 or 4 walnut trees locally here in Denver before they were all gone. Yeah, without thousand cankers disease. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's non-existent here. There are none left. Yeah, because I tried real hard because the state capitol had two walnut trees in their front yard, and they were dying. And I mean, I talked to them real hard about, I would love to harvest the trees and repurpose them. And I said, I know enough people that will turn a bunch of stuff and you can and put it on display at the Capitol when we're done. And I never could get a hold of them. I don't know if they just cut them down and turned it into landfill. Because I knew if I'd have come to the club and said, "Hey, I've got 50 blanks," pick one, keep one, and turn one for the state capitol. You know, my biggest feather is I just had a picture at the state capitol with a frame I made. And that picture went to Washington, D.C. So it's like, cool. No, it was a young girl, who painted a picture and won it at whatever level she was at, and it went to the state capitol. And apparently she did well enough there that it went to the capitol in D.C. So, because it was like one of those things, the mom would not take the frame for free, so that's your whole $20 for wood that's 110 years old, weathered for 110 years. But, but it's kind of fun. Feather in my cap. So, any other questions? Yep. 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 Uh, I'm not quite understanding. Are you saying this part of it? How? Because I know to, because the, yeah, because to do a Celtic knot in a ring to me would be really, really difficult. I mean, the only thing I can, yeah, yeah, yeah. I, if when you're doing it, my thought would be if when you're doing it, you're not looking at consistency, you could pretty much cut whatever you want on a bandsaw, and you just got to make your veneer. And I mean, typically you want to make your veneer, your shim, the size of your saw cut, because I learned that when I was doing hollow spirals. When I would cut stuff apart and put it back together, it didn't ever look right unless I replaced my saw cut with wood. So if you cut it on the bandsaw, you're talking you'd have a very thin shim. But again, if you're not looking at something that's just really consistent, like a Celtic knot, if it's more random, then you could use whatever size shim you wanted to, you know. And again, just cut it, glue it, cut it, glue it, cut it, glue it. Because they do that with cutting boards, where they'll take and just cut it, glue them together, and keep cutting and gluing different woods in. and they look busy and interesting to say the least, but it's random. Celtic knots are not random. They're completely consistent. Yeah, 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 yeah. I'd have to see it to see if there's like if I could think of any way. Uh, for something like a ring, I would think that's virtually impossible just because of the size. With woodworking equipment, you, yeah, 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 yeah. Because I mean, without seeing it, I don't quite. Because I know I had looked at different Celtic knots and stuff. Because this is the one you always see in woodworking. You know, and it's like, yeah, and I see other Celtic knots, and it's like, okay, if you got a shape of origin, I could see how you could do it in the surface of the wood, but then when you turn it, what happens to it? You'd end up turning most of it away, and it won't even be there. So you got to look at how do you cut it all the way through and put it back together. So, because I have seen stuff that I still can't figure out, and people do it. You know what I mean? Yeah, yeah. Because I'm quite often here, unless I'm out of town. So, and that I know of, not until probably the December, whether I'm going to be here. And that would be the Christmas party. I might miss it. I don't. I got to look and see where I'm not where I'm going, but when I'm going. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Because that was like I say, just because of the how I do this, where I don't cut through the piece of wood. You can't do it on the bandsaw. It's kind of like table saw, maybe a chop saw, but to do a Celtic knot in a hollow form, how do you cut that deep? Then you're looking at, okay, do I know somebody that has a saw that has a 16 or 20-inch blade? You know, well, and yeah, I got a friend up in Salida that has one. And it's like, and he didn't even know how deep it could cut. And when I said 5 or 6 inches, he go, "Oh yeah, it'll cut that." So I don't know how deep it'll cut. No, Pat, uh, Pat Murphy. Oh, okay. Yeah, and it's like, how deep do they cut? It's something I'm not familiar with. And I know what Pat has isn't a table saw anymore. And because he mentioned what it was, and I have no idea, but Pat is very much into commercial stuff. Okay. But yeah, because I know Pat and Keith know each other real well up there. But yeah, and I don't know if I want to. I got to do hollow forms before. That's the reason I biggest reason I bought the new lathe I bought, because you can pull the switch to the other side of the middle from Stewart. I bought the 2020, the 20, or 3520. So technically it was downsizing from my lathe, but it's like going from a Yugo to a Cadillac. Maybe smaller, but not even in the same category. Yep. Yeah, some guy up in Clubland area, not even a member of the clubs and stuff. Pat, hey, Pat, didn't you get enough kickback from me?